Happy Friday. Happy opening day. If you celebrate, we're
I
celebrating.
celebrate.
Yeah, you're the baseball guy. I certainly appreciate the sport, but opening day at Coors Field in downtown Denver. Maybe one day there'll be an NFL Broncos opening day that is not in downtown Denver.
Ooh, now that is something spicy to open the show with, Eason. That's a good way to open this. I like that. I was wondering how we would ease into it. You didn't ease into it. You did it like Newton Loosh in Bull Durham. You brought the heater and announced your presence with authority.
We're here. We're feeling good on a Friday. It's East Salami, Andrew Mason, Orange and Blue today. And this is a subject that draws a lot of impassioned responses, Mace, for good reason.
Yeah. It is, because we're talking about something that really helps define the franchise.
Yeah.
Your home. I mean, I almost want to go into Happy Gilmore mode. Are you too good for your home?
It's your home.
Yeah. Your home.
Mm-hmm.
Broncos, they've been at their current home since 2001, but really the same basic spot, because of course they were in an area that is now the parking lot. They have been at the same spot, the same part of town for their entire history since 1960. Mile High Stadium, before it, that known as Bear Stadium, because of course it was a baseball stadium, back to baseball, before it was a football stadium.
Old Denver Bears.
Yeah, and never lost all of that baseball quality, actually. I mean, they're, the north, or the northwest corner of the stadium was always kind of designed for baseball, right? That's where home plate was at that stadium. Up until 1994, you'd always have some early season games that had the dirt infield, right? And of course, the Colorado Rockies called it home for the first 2 years of their franchise. But the Denver Broncos have played in that part of town for their entire history. And now, might they be in that part of town? They could be. Greg Penner hasn't dismissed that. He did point out on Monday down in Palm Beach that the Broncos do have development rights for that area. That was something that they got approval on, development rights around the current stadium. They did that when Joe Ellis was steward of the franchise in the Pat Bowlen Trust era. So they have that, but he mentioned some other possibilities. And let's just go ahead and play the response from Greg Penner when asked about the stadium down in Palm Beach at the NFL annual meeting on Monday.
We're continuing our diligence. As I mentioned before, it's complex. We haven't ruled anything out. We're still looking at the current site, other sites around Denver, Lone Tree, Aurora. We don't have a set timetable for making a decision. We obviously have our lease that ends at a certain date, which is a date that we could focus on, but it could be something that would happen earlier than that. If we needed to, we could be in our current stadium longer. So we don't have a set timetable at this point.
So he refers to the lease 2030. After the 2030 season is when the lease at Empower Field at Mile High expires. I mean, they could certainly go beyond that. They could add years to it.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't dismissed renovation, so that's still potentially out there, although every sign seems to point toward a new build. It's just a question of where. I would be surprised, Cease, if we're talking about a renovation on that stadium, partially because, as we saw, this came up with Tennessee in recent years, the cost of a renovation sometimes can be prohibitive to the point where you say, okay, is it really worth it to renovate when you can probably get more bang for your buck out of a new build?
Right. And a new look and new technology. I'm not saying the bones are bad at Empower Field, Mason. You've been to more stadiums than I, and more recently than I. But when I've gone to Super Bowls and I see a state-of-the-art stadium like Minnesota or Atlanta, I go, okay, Broncos Stadium, and this may offend, but it's kind of middle of the pack. It's not the worst in the league, but it's certainly not the creme de la creme like they have in LA or Minnesota or Atlanta.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting, the bones do matter and maintenance matters. So Tennessee saw some things happening foundationally to Nissan Stadium and said, new build. Now, also another thing that was in play was Nashville as a city, a lot of hotels, tourist destination. Nashville was keen on getting into the Super Bowl Final Four mix. So the belief was there was a significant value add to having a stadium with a roof. Thus, the Titans will have a new build with a roof. Tampa Bay this week, talking about renovations to Raymond James Stadium, referred to as massive. Their lease expires in 2028. Raymond James Stadium lease is actually 3 years older than Empower Field at Mile High.
Okay.
I would say this. Which stadium feels older? To me, I'd say Empower Field feels a bit older in terms of the fan areas of the stadium. I would say also that Empower Field is superior in some things like visitors' locker room. The visitors' locker room at Raymond James Stadium is tiny, as we were reminded back in September when the Broncos visited. That's one thing the Broncos did get right. They have a nice visitors' locker room. Raymond James Stadium does not have a nice visitors' locker room, and I hope if they renovate that stadium, that is one thing they do fix.
Yeah.
But I
We'll
digress.
see what they do about that. We'll see if they move this thing now. Greg Penner mentions Aurora. So people are like, what? Aurora? Yeah. The airport. We've always known somewhere out there. The Lone Tree site, which I'm going to get regional here, but it's just across from the Cabela's on Lincoln and I-25, basically. There's a lot of room because our very own Will Peterson at Denver Sports, very emotional about this. And he's like, why would you move it? It's not the Lone Tree Broncos. Well, it ain't the Orchard Park Bills either. It's not
I know.
49ers. And what I told Will is this. I said, if you are a billionaire, sure, you could share where Elitch is at, where the Kroenke family, your cousins, basically, you could split some of that, and maybe the Broncos Stadium is next to Ball Arena, and then this huge complex. Or you could go down to Lone Tree, own everything, build everything, and build exactly what you want.
Yeah, and you have to wonder if what is potentially going to go on around Ball Arena isn't having an impact here. Because is there room for two massive developments flanking I-25, basically? Or if the Broncos built elsewhere, if they built a little bit south, right? Talking about, say, a little bit south down towards Santa Fe, down towards Santa Fe, not Santa Fe, New Mexico, but down, the road Santa Fe. Yeah.
Highway 85.
Yeah, they're not building in New Mexico. Okay. So I just want to make that clear. Well, there are some people who, if they're not local and they heard Santa Fe, they'd be like, what? No.
Yeah,
so
Highway 85.
That's why I want to clarify that. Not everybody knows Denver road geography if you're watching this show. That's
right.
I want to make that clear. So there's that. Central Denver may not be able to support all that. So the other thing with Aurora, now it's interesting to hear Aurora mentioned because when all of this was first being discussed a few years ago, I think everybody initially thought Aurora out towards the airport,
Oh
out
yeah.
up Pena Boulevard, going towards the airport. Now, there are some issues with that. Number one, the first thing that goes through your mind is Pena Boulevard right now is already inadequate for the traffic it is dealing with.
It's a mess.
Yes, it needs to be widened. And there's another study that is being commissioned like, oh, do we widen it? Do we encourage people to use more public transit? Whatever. What we know is Pena Boulevard, 2 lanes in each direction, woefully inadequate. Anyone who is sat in traffic, either going to the airport or just going home, because
Yeah.
one of the reasons why traffic is what it is because neighborhoods are being built, people are moving out there, it is exploding. Now, that being said, because neighborhoods are being built, this is another reason why a stadium and development is viable out there, because if you have a development with shops and big box stores, think of like what the New England Patriots have with Patriot Place in Foxborough. There was a time when Foxborough, roughly halfway between Boston and Providence, was the middle of nowhere. Well, the suburbs of Boston and Providence caught up to it. It's not the middle of nowhere anymore. And now there are a lot of people living in that region who are shopping at those stores, going to those restaurants. So if the Broncos built out there, there's a natural built-in audience that would be partaking of things that you would build around there on an everyday basis. So all of a sudden it seems more viable. The other thing about Aurora is there might be some tax breaks involved. We know about the Gaylord Hotel that is out that way. According to a report from the Denver Gazette a few years ago, the owner of the Gaylord Rockies Resort is getting $1.3 billion in tax breaks over the course of decades, expected to get that from building in that spot.
Wow.
And so I thought it was interesting that Greg Penner mentioned Aurora, because Aurora as a city does have a history of making what we would say are business friendly deals to attract something that's a big project like this. Not necessarily public funding. And I think we all agree the preference would be for this to be privately funded, like SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. The Cronkies paid for that.
Mm-hmm.
They bought the land around Hollywood Park and they built that stadium. I think we all agree the best thing is for this to be privately funded.
Yes.
And then you can do whatever the heck you want with it. But certainly, I think we all expect some, because this is the way these things work. I think we all expect some form of tax break, because that's just sort of how these things end up working.
Yeah, that's the business that we're talking about here. And that's where the leverage conversation comes in.
Yeah.
Because people will say, well, Greg just said Aurora now for leverage. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah.
Yeah.
We can't be mad at business people for using the leverage that they should be using. Yes, you're going to mention Aurora. You're considering all options right now. And with the lease up in 2030, in 3 years, they could be breaking ground on a new stadium in a new location. Or like you mentioned earlier, they could just be re-upping the lease for a little bit longer, stretch this thing out. I don't think that happens. That maybe is the least likely thing to happen. But it's an option. And using leverage is smart. People like Greg Penner, smart. He's going to do the business thing, man.
They know exactly what they're doing on this.
Yes.
I mean, let's face it. Walmart has a lot of experience with this sort of thing.
You don't get $70 billion by accident.
And if you don't think they're leaning on and using the experience of the Cronkies, both with everything with Ball Arena and everything with the SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, as you know, as something that they're learning from and that they've taken notes from, you're not doing your homework. I mean, they've gone around, and that the other thing is they've toured a lot of stadiums around the country and developments around the country, and not just in football. Like, they've looked at other stadiums, they've looked at developments. So, like, for example, it's not just that they've looked at stadiums like US Bank Stadium in Minneapolis, or SoFi Stadium, or State Farm Stadium, where the Cardinals play in Glendale, Arizona, or Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. They've looked at stadiums like Truist Park, where the Atlanta Braves play in. It's technically has an Atlanta address, but there's an example of a team that went from being close to the city center to out in the suburbs. But that's an example of a development around the stadium, and I think probably is currently the most successful example of a development around a stadium. Now, it's a different thing with baseball because you have 81 games versus 10. But as far as developing mixed use apartments, in fact, they just this week bought 6 more buildings and blocks near there to expand the footprint. So, like, they've done a lot of homework on this as far as the scope of what they want to do. Now it's a question of trying to sort of narrow it down and hone in on how much space they need to enact their vision. Is there enough space in the area west of I-25 where they currently call home to do that? And with the development on the other side of 25 around Ball Arena, is it logical to do that? Will they get bang for their buck, essentially competing with everything that's going to go on around Ball Arena? Or are they better served going out to the northeast quadrant of the area near the airport, or going down the Lone Tree? I mean, these are all questions as well. The one thing we do know, Cease, is this: wherever the Broncos go, people are going to go to the games.
Oh, yeah.
This is the other thing about the NFL compared to other sports. NFL games in an NFL stadium is the one that least needs to be downtown. A baseball stadium, an arena for hockey or the NBA, these are the venues that benefit most from being in the urban core because of the frequency of the sporting events that go on there. And when they happen during a lot of them are during, on weeknights, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. NFL games mostly being on weekends and being once a week, special occasion things. And frankly, even when they're on weeknights, fair amount of people take the days off, right? They become all day events. It's the sporting event and the sport that is least benefited by having a stadium downtown and in the urban core. Now, obviously, the Broncos aren't downtown; they're a little bit away from it. In fact, if you go back to Denver 4 decades ago, there's a nice bit of space between downtown and where the stadium is. Downtown, the urban core has creeped over to where the Broncos sit.
It's not just the round table apartments there in the parking lot anymore, Mace. There's another apartment building that's been built there, and that's another thing to consider when I think of Lone Tree, which will be closer to me. But, like, just think of the space. But we have to think of it 20 years from now. How that's going to be built up. Hell, Castle Rock to Denver might just be one big city and hardly any space now, even though you got Castle Pines there.
Cease, someday we might be talking about it being built up all the way to Larkspur.
Oh, yeah.
It's not hard to conceive of a future where almost everything is developed from Denver to Monument. I mean, it's crazy to think that right now because there's some gorgeous open territory. I mean, I love the drive from Denver to the Springs. There's some. I'm going to sound like the cowboy in City Slickers. There's some territory on that drive that's just as pretty as heaven. I love it.
Yeah.
Especially as you get into the golden hour when the sun is starting to set. My goodness.
Pikes
breathtaking.
Peak, just huge.
Yeah. This is why stuff that makes you say, this is why I live in Colorado, right? I mean, my camera shakes. That's how, How carried away I get.
Getting emotional.
Yeah. Well, it's starting to become not as unspoiled as it used to be.
Yep.
As people keep coming. That's the thing. People have come to the area in the Northeast quadrant. Remember when the airport used to be the middle of nowhere? Not anymore. That's the thing. People talk about, oh, the Broncos built out by the airport. It's the middle of nowhere. Nope. It's not the middle of nowhere anymore, folks.
Not now.
No. Nowhere's become somewhere. Look at, again, I mentioned the Patriots. Foxborough used to be the middle of nowhere. Nowhere became somewhere. Only in Buffalo, Orchard Park's way out there, and it's still kind of way out there. That's kind of, but Buffalo didn't really grow in the way people thought it would. But Denver continues to explode. The Denver area continues to explode. So,
and imagine a district, a stadium district that's all your own.
Mm-hmm.
Aurora, Lone Tree, whatever. And I say this with no ill will towards downtown at all. Okay. And I understand that's part of the conversation. Like, downtown's dying. I'm not happy about that, Mace.
Yeah.
And hopefully it can turn around and, businesses can thrive or whatever needs to be down there to rejuvenate downtown. But if you could own your own district, wouldn't that be what you want to do?
Yeah. And the other thing that comes into play is, yes, the owners of the Broncos have money, but you do want the business of football to be self-sustaining.
Mm-hmm.
And you can dive into the largesse to put that money into escrow whenever you need to sign a player. You have those resources. It certainly does help. But I'm sure they want to be able to say, okay, let's just have that come from the revenues we're generating.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they're good business people. They know what they're doing. If they feel like they can get the most bang for their buck by doing that in Lone Tree and Aurora, that's what they're going to do. Will something be lost if they leave that spot? Yeah, and I do get the emotional tie. I do, but they're going to create new memories wherever they go.
Mm-hmm. And they call it progress, Mace. The hill that Walter Payton used to run up and down is a parking lot now.
Yeah. Pave paradise and put up a parking lot, right? The one thing, though, and I know this is going to come up, you just hope that whatever happens, there's not things like seat licenses and stuff. You hope that they don't price out the diehard fans. That is something that I think is a fair concern.
Mm-hmm.
That I hope that we're not seeing something where people that have had tickets since time immemorial have to give them up. I don't want to have this become a situation where brokers end up controlling the seats and we lose the home field advantage, the thing that makes the environment special. We've already lost it to some degree. It's not what it used to be, but it's still pretty dadgum loud. I hope that doesn't go away. This is something that I really hope that they're mindful of. And you know what? Here's something. If you have a development around the stadium and you can generate those sorts of revenues in other ways, maybe you can ensure that in the stadium you can keep the ticket base the way it has been. And that you don't have to do things like seat licenses and whatnot because you have this development from which you can generate revenues. Maybe that's part of it as well. Do all this so you don't feel like you have to say, okay, we're going to have all these seat licenses and, ask people to pay this. That's the sort of thing that maybe is worth considering as well. I'm thinking out loud here. But I don't
love when you think out loud.
I don't want that. The most important thing is wherever you play, whether it's Aurora, Lone Tree, down, or west side of I-25 near the current spot. I don't want to lose the soul of this. And one last thing before you go, Cease. What do you prefer and what do you expect? Open air, retractable roof, fixed roof. What do you prefer? What do you expect?
What do you call Minnesota's?
it's fixed roof, but they can slide open the windows at one end so you can have open air when it's like a carport when it's nice.
Do that to the mountainside.
Yeah. I think that's what it'll end up being, whatever they build.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you'll be a retractable roof. I don't think that's cost effective. There's a lot of maintenance involved with that.
Those are kind of done now, right? Atlanta, maybe the last one. Atlanta's is really nice, the circular closed, but like that kind of not to say that was a fad, but it's certainly not maybe leading everybody. So just get a retractable roof. No.
It's the maintenance of it that really becomes a concern. And how often do you open it is the other thing. I think the retractable roof still has value in baseball because of the frequency with which you'd open it. I don't know if it has value in football. I think the Minnesota also, the way they design it with the windows and how, even though you've got the fixed roof, it feels like if it's a sunny day, you get the light coming in. I think Minnesota threads a very nice needle of having it be enclosed when it's cold, but not feeling like it's drab and dreary like some enclosed stadiums do. I think to me, that's the needle you need to try and thread here when you're building this.
Well, happy opening day, everybody out there.
Happy opening day.
And
for those who celebrate.
Who knows where we'll be when this airs, because we'll be downtown.
And somehow I'm right here in my home studio.
And I'm somehow in the mountains of Roxborough. So
I'm two places at once.
If you see us, say hi. Don't be a stranger, because we'll be out and about at Coors Field, and it's a little baseball day today, but that's okay. We're here for you doing another OBT and
baseball World Series 07.
They only got one, man. They only got one. Get the brooms out. Let's wrap this thing up with some help on YouTube, Mace. How do folks do that?
Like,
comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell
so that you never miss a vid. That's right. He's Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammy saying OBT's BFD. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned and stay frosty.